The wind howled like a wounded beast across the slopes of Kolit, the mountain of the dead. Snow swirled violently, blinding the landscape in a haze of white. Somewhere in that frozen wilderness, 9 young hikers trudged onward, unaware that their adventure would soon become a nightmare no one would ever fully explain. It began like any expedition, laughter cutting through the icy air, the rhythm of skis crunching against frozen ground, and the promise of conquering the forbidding Urals. Igor Dyatlov, their leader, led the group with meticulous care, each step calculated, each decision deliberate. These were seasoned mountaineers. Cold was their companion, danger their familiar shadow. But that night, under the ghostly light of a winter moon, the mountains whispered a different story. Something unseen stirred in the stillness. A presence, or perhaps a force, so alien, so terrifying, that it would unravel the lives of 9 brave souls in ways no human logic could explain. By evening, the team had pitched their tent on the slopes of Kolit. The air was sharp, each breath slicing through the lungs like glass. Inside, the hikers huddled together, sharing stories, food, and warmth. Outside, the mountains stretched into darkness, a landscape untouched by humanity, waiting. Then came a sound, faint at first, almost imperceptible like fabric being torn. It grew sharper, more deliberate, until the silence of the wilderness seemed to split apart. Something was moving. Something was watching. Moments later, as if seized by an instinct older than fear itself, the hikers tore through the canvas walls of their tent. Boots, coats, and sanity left behind, they ran into the night. Snow devoured them. Darkness swallowed them. In the mountains waited. The rescue teams would later find footprints, strange and haunting, scattered in the snow like a trail of whispers. Some were barefoot, some in socks, some in nothing but night clothes. Each step spoke of terror, so raw it defied reason. The hikers had fled from something unseen, that forced them into the freezing abyss. Days later, the first bodies were discovered, frozen and contorted, as if the cold itself had carved them into grotesque statues. Fractured skulls, missing eyes, ripped open torsos. And yet, strangely, there were no external wounds sufficient to explain such destruction. How could 9 young, fit individuals, trained for survival, end their journey in such incomprehensible horror? The tent remained behind, silent, ripped open from the inside. Personal items, shoes, coats, all abandoned. The mountains had claimed their stories, leaving behind fragments of terror for the world to puzzle over. Avalanche? Perhaps. But the terrain offered no signs of a massive slide. Sudden katabatic winds? Maybe. But would winds alone cause the fractures, the missing eyes, the internal injuries? Some whispered of secret military experiments, radioactive exposure, or even alien visitation. The truth, buried under decades of snow and silence, remained unreachable. Every theory carried shadows of fear, each more chilling than the last. And through it all, the mountains stood indifferent, silent witnesses to the final screams that no one heard, the terror that no one survived, and the mystery that refused to die. Even today, explorers speak of a heavy, unnatural presence at Dyatlov Pass. The wind carries whispers. The snow hides secrets. And those who enter the mountain of the dead sometimes wonder if the hikers were not alone that night, and if whatever waited is still there. The night air was a living thing, biting, whispering, and relentless. Outside the tent, the wind roared like some ancient predator, tearing through the trees and whipping snow into a blinding frenzy. Inside, the hikers huddled together, unaware that the mountain's silence had already turned against them. It started as a faint noise, almost imperceptible. Some thought it was the wind. Others dismissed it as the creak of ice settling. But Igor Dyatlov, ever vigilant, paused mid-bite of his ration, frowning at the tent's shivering walls. "Listen," he whispered, voice taut with unease. The sound came again. A tearing, scraping sound, like metal dragged over rock, yet there was no metal nearby. The hikers exchanged nervous glances. Ludmilla, always perceptive, felt her stomach tighten. "It's outside," she murmured, barely audible. "Something's there." Panic didn't announce itself. It erupted. As if an unseen force had flared within the tent, Igor ordered the group to gather their gear. But no one could. The tent ripped violently from the inside. Fabric tore with a shriek that echoed through the mountains. Snow poured in, and then, instinctively, as if the air itself screamed at them, the hikers fled. They left everything behind: boots, coats, food, even cameras. Some didn't even have socks. They stumbled blindly into the night, half-dressed, into temperatures that could kill within minutes. Snow clawed at their faces, cold bit through their lungs, yet the terror driving them was stronger than any frost. They ran toward something, or perhaps away from it. The darkness enveloped them, hiding whatever pursued. Shapes loomed in the periphery of vision. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving with them. Each step was agony, each breath a battle. And still, the unseen force pressed on. Days later, search teams found the tent, shredded and abandoned. Footprints led away, scattered and erratic, like frantic scribbles in the snow. Some tracks disappeared abruptly, as if swallowed by the earth, or by something else. The first two bodies were discovered near a small ravine. Half-dressed, frozen, eyes wide with terror, mouths agape, as if screaming silently. Their injuries were minor compared to what would come later, yet the expressions of horror etched into their frozen faces told rescuers everything. These young hikers had seen something unimaginable. Over the next 2 weeks, the remaining bodies were found. Each one told a story more horrifying than the last. Fractured skulls and ribs that suggested impossible force. Missing eyes and tongues, removed without signs of struggle. Internal injuries so severe they resembled the aftermath of a high-speed collision, yet no external trauma could explain it. Medical examiners were baffled. How could the mountain, wind, or snow cause such devastation? How could 9 experienced, fit, intelligent hikers die in such mysterious, violent ways while leaving no trace of an attack? Even more chilling were the items left behind in the tent. Cameras with undeveloped film, journals containing mundane notes and plans, all untouched by the horror that had overtaken the hikers. It was as if normal life had been ripped away in a single, incomprehensible moment. Theories were plentiful, but none conclusive. Avalanche, plausible, yet the injuries and tent positioning didn't match. Katabatic winds, sudden gusts that could terrify and disorient, but not crush skulls or remove eyes. Military experiments, secret tests of weapons or radioactive devices might explain anomalies, yet evidence remains circumstantial. Paranormal, UFOs, spirits, or unknown forces, the locals whispered about it for decades. The investigation concluded with one official phrase: an unknown compelling force. But decades later, the case remains unsolved, a chilling reminder of how small humanity is against the vast, indifferent, and sometimes malevolent forces of nature, or the unknown. 9 young souls carried their dreams into the mountains, each with their own hopes, their own reasons for being there. To understand the terror of their end, you must know them as more than just names in an investigation file. Igor Dyatlov was the leader, only 23, yet already respected for his discipline and determination. To his team, he was steady, reliable, someone who could lead them through the worst conditions. He kept a journal, detailing every small success along the way. In those pages, the world saw no fear, no hint of the horror to come. Ludmilla Dubinina, the youngest at 20, was fiery and passionate. She carried her camera everywhere, capturing the smiles of her companions against the cold, white canvas of the Urals. She wrote letters to her family, joking about the hardships of the journey. Yet she would be found with her tongue missing, her body so damaged investigators could scarcely explain it. Rustam Slobodin loved adventure. Friends remembered his quiet strength, his ability to endure hardship without complaint. He was found with a fractured skull, lying alone in the snow, as though he had tried to crawl back toward the tent. Zina Kolmogorova was strong-willed, with a warmth that kept the group's spirits alive. Her diary described the laughter of the journey, her affection for her friends. Yet her frozen face bore a grimace of terror no one could decipher. Others, Alexander, Yuri, Nikolai, Semyon, and Yuri Durashenko, were equally vibrant, their lives cut short in a night that erased joy and left only silence. Each of them had faced hardship before, yet nothing had prepared them for this. The most haunting realization came to rescuers later. When they fled the tent, they didn't scatter in fear like strangers. They fled together, as if bound by an unspoken pact. They didn't abandon each other, even as the mountain consumed them. Their footprints in the snow told the story. Side by side, they walked into the frozen dark, as if holding onto one last shred of unity. But unity could not save them from what was waiting. When the first rescue teams arrived, they expected to find a stranded group, exhausted but alive. Instead, they stumbled upon a nightmare. The tent was pitched at an odd angle on the slope of Kolit, partially collapsed, partially buried in snow. But what chilled the searchers wasn't the tent's condition. It was the gaping slashes in the fabric, cut from the inside. The hikers had not left calmly. They had ripped their way out. Inside lay their belongings, boots neatly arranged, coats folded, journals and cameras untouched. It was as though their lives had been suspended mid-action. One searcher recalled later. It felt like they had left in a panic, as if something had suddenly invaded their world. The first bodies were discovered under a cedar tree, stripped nearly naked despite the sub-zero cold. They had tried to build a fire, small branches broken and scattered, as if their frozen hands had worked desperately against time. The tree itself bore signs of someone having climbed it. Branches snapped high above the ground. Why? Did they climb in fear? Were they trying to see something or escape it? Further up the slope, more bodies appeared. Some faced the tent, as though they had tried to return. One man's fists were bloodied, frozen in a final act of desperate crawling. Another's skull was fractured, yet without external bleeding. And then there were the last four, buried deep under snow in a ravine. Their injuries were beyond comprehension. Rib cages caved in, organs destroyed, eyes missing, Ludmila's tongue torn away. Doctors examining the bodies struggled to find explanations. The pressure required to cause such internal damage was compared to that of a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no marks on the outside of the bodies to suggest blunt force trauma. It was as if an unseen hand had crushed them from within. Even more disturbing was the faint trace of radioactivity found on some of the clothing. The discovery was hushed, buried in official reports, but it lingered like a poisonous question. Had these hikers stumbled into something secret, something forbidden? The searchers themselves whispered of strange feelings at the sight. Some described the air as charged, heavy with an energy they could not explain. At night, when they camped nearby, they swore the wind carried voices, faint cries that rose and fell with the snow. Men who had never feared war or wilderness found themselves uneasy, afraid of the shadows. One rescuer later confessed, "It felt like the mountain was alive, and it didn't want us there." The Soviet Union officially closed the Dyatlov case in May of 1959. Their final statement was chilling in its vagueness. The hikers died as a result of an unknown compelling force. No further explanation. No details. Just silence. But silence only breeds speculation. And speculation, in this case, became darker than the night on that mountain. Some whispered of military experiments. The Urals were no stranger to secrecy. Locals reported strange orange orbs of light in the sky during those weeks. Fireballs that moved with intelligence, not the chaos of meteor showers. Could the hikers have stumbled into a test site? Were they victims of weapons designed to crush bone and sear flesh without leaving outward marks? Others leaned into the supernatural. The Montsi, an indigenous people of the Urals, had long called the mountain Kolit the mountain of the dead. Legends told of spirits guarding the high passes, punishing those who trespassed where humans did not belong. To them, what happened to the nine was not a mystery at all. It was retribution. And then there were the whispers of the unknown creatures that roamed the peaks. A photograph discovered on one of the hikers' cameras showed an eerie, dark figure standing among the trees in the distance. Grainy, blurred, but undeniably humanoid. Some claimed the group had crossed paths with something not quite human, not quite beast, an intruder in the night that had driven them into madness and death. The strangest theory of all came from the stars. Some believed the orbs in the sky were not weapons, but watchers, that the group was not alone in the snow, that their panic had been caused by something otherworldly. Strange burns on clothing and unexplained radiation traces fueled the belief that whatever claimed them was not of this earth. The truth, buried under decades of snow, remained elusive. But one thing was certain. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no simple accident. The story should have ended in 1959, filed away in dusty Soviet archives. But the Dyatlov Pass incident refused to die. It lingered. It haunted. Decades later, explorers retraced the hikers' route. Some reported a heavy stillness in the air, as though the mountain itself watched them. Others claimed their compasses spun erratically, electronics malfunctioned, and that at night, the wind carried voices, faint, echoing cries that rose from the snowdrifts like echoes of the past. One climber swore he awoke in the middle of the night to find strange lights dancing above the ridge, eerily similar to the ones described in witness reports from 1959. His camera captured nothing, but his memory never left him. It wasn't the sky, he said. It was something moving within it. The site is now marked by a memorial, a simple stone with the names of the nine carved into it. Visitors leave flowers, letters, and sometimes small offerings, as though appeasing something unseen. But many who visit speak of an oppressive weight that settles on the chest, a silence too complete, too unnatural. For the families of the victims, the grief never truly faded. Some demanded answers, others accepted fate. But none could escape the chilling thought. What if they knew? What if in those final moments, the hikers understood what was happening, and that knowledge is the reason no living soul could ever explain it? The Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a story of 9 young lives lost in the snow. It is a reminder that the world is vast, that the wilderness holds secrets older and darker than humanity itself. When investigators closed the case, they left more questions than answers. How does one define an unknown compelling force? Was it nature, merciless, indifferent, crushing? Or was it something else, something intelligent, malevolent, and unseen? To this day, the mountain stands as it did that night in 1959, cold, silent, indifferent. Travelers still ski its slopes. Scientists still argue over theories. Filmmakers still exploit its horror. Yet none have pierced the silence completely. Because silence is the mountain's weapon. Silence hides the truth. Silence holds the final screams of Dyatlov's group, frozen in snowdrifts no sun will ever melt. And perhaps that is the real horror. Not the broken bodies, not the torn tent, not the missing eyes or the radiation, but the idea that some truths are never meant for us to know. That the mountain whispered a secret to 9 hikers and then buried it forever. So when the wind howls across the Urals, some say it carries voices: Igor, Zina, Rustam, Ludmila, Semyon, Yuri, and the others. Ghosts of a night when the human world collided with something unspeakable. And if you ever stand on Kolit Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, you may wonder, when you hear the whisper in the snow, if you are truly alone.